Hello，鲍老师。你那个静音是不是要主持人帮你解除一下，还是你自己就可以解除？呃，哎
得需要主持人帮忙解除，
，OK
现在应该可以
OK，
了。
现在应该可以。哎，实在不好意思让你久等了，这边一直没调试成功，然后导致大家一直在这个等候区进不来会议，实在是不好意思。
啊，没事没事。
啊，
那我们今天还
行，然后咱们就是只能稍微晚点开始。我看现在还依然有很多那个同学和老师们在这个在观众里面，然后我去我们系的群里跟大家说一声，现在开始，你看可以
行
吗？然后时
行
时间上就比较灵活，然后因为咱们开始的也晚嘛，你是快一点慢一点都可以。对对对，因为这毕竟是线上嘛，如果其他同学老师有急事他们走的话，应该也不影响。好吧，
行
就是你按原来的节奏讲也可以，你快一点慢一点都 OK。我去群里跟他们先说
行，
一声。
那我再等几分钟开始吧。
好的，好的，
我现在先试一下，我 share 一下 screen 吧。
好的，好的。
喂，可以看到吗？
嗯，可以，可以。
看到还有很多其他不是天大的。
对，因为我们的这个讲座会你也看到了，发到了我们的公众号上嘛，然后发到公众号，可能就有其他的老师同学们，就是其他单位老师同学们就看到了。
好，
对，
这样能更多的收集点 comments 也挺好的。
希望希望能就是大家讨论的会有欢乐一点。然后我看一下，对对对，咱们要不10点半开始，你看怎么样啊？等大家
行
再进一进。
行行，嗯。
嗯哼。
是这样子，我准备的时候是用英文准备的，但
OK，
是大家如果有任何的问题，或者说你就是不太清楚的地方，就是大家可以用中文提问，我也尽量用中文回答。
好的好的，就是大家用中文、英文交流都可以，对吧？
对对对对。
对，
然后
那等一下，对你说。
对，然后大家如果有什么问题的话，就随时提问就可以了，就没必要非得等到我讲完之后再提问。
OK OK，
嗯，
看一下大家这个。行，等下着我把这些 housekeeping 的事情跟大家简单说一下，然后也包括对你进行一个介绍，之后大家就可以就可以进入你的这个 talk 了。
嗯，
好吧。行，那我看10点半了，咱们开始，然后陆续有对老师同学们进来，咱们再进来。首先就是各位同学老师们，早上好，很高兴大家来参加我们天津大学市场营销系这一周的学术报告。这周我们请来的呢是这个来自于这个 UIUC 伊利诺伊大学香槟分校的鲍莹教授。然后他呢之前是在多伦多大学取得的博士学位，现在在伊利诺伊大学那边任教。就是关于他的研究呢，就是简单介绍一下，是我们营销领域为数不多，既可以做理论，又可以做实证的这个学者之一，就是analytical 和这个 empirical 双修。所以我们今天来到场的，不论是老师同学，不论你是做 analytical 的，还是你做 empirical 的，想必呢都会有所收获。就是我们也是期待满满。然后在开始之前呢，就是简单介绍一下咱们今天的那个讲座的一些事情。第一就是实在是不好意思，我们应该是10点开始，因为一些个 技术的原因，大家一直没有能进入到会议室里面来。其实我们也没有进入到会议室里面来，这个实在是不好意思，各位参加的老师同学们，包括那个鲍老师，都是等了半天，实在是不好意思。然后第二就是在过程之中呢，鲍老师应该主要以英文为主，在进行这个学术分享。我们参加的同学老师如果想参与讨论或者想提问的话，是中文、英文都可以。包括时间上呢，大家可以随时打断鲍老师，就是应该是在聊天区可以留言，或者是应该有举手功能，就是活用这个腾讯会的各种功能，就是大家随时想讨论、想提问都可以。然后我会帮着那个鲍老师看着一下聊天区，如果是大家有留言有提问的话，我可以随时帮大家问出来也行。然后就是这些简单的 housekeeping， 然后剩下的时间呢，就是交给鲍老师，好吧？
好。谢谢王峰老师的介绍，然后我今天特别开心能够在这里 share 一下我的 research， 然后我们现在这篇 paper 还是一个 working paper 的状态，就是我们还没有投到任何的杂志上面去，所以就是如果大家有任何的 comments suggestions， 就是欢迎大家随时提出来，然后我们也会尽量去 address 你的这些 comments， 然后会把这些放在updated 的这个 version 里面。那其他的我就不多说，我就从现在开始吧。So the project I'm presenting today is titled as the BMI food purchase and price sensitivity. So this is a joint work with my amazing co-authors Matt Osborne, who's from University of Toronto, who's also my mentor, Emily Wang from UMass Amherst, and Ted Yannicki from Penn State. So before I start, there's something like a disclaimer. So the findings and conclusions is only on us. It does not have any policy implication, does not represent USDA RI. So the data is actually from USDA. So this is pure research, has nothing to do with the policy. Just want to make sure that the USDA want us to have the disclaimer before the presentation. So even before I present it, I need to have it cleared. Okay. So let's get started. Obesity rate has been increasing rapidly, and obesity has become a major health issue. Unfortunately, that's no longer a surprise to us. Maybe while I'm talking, we can take a look at this GIF. So it shows how obesity rate changed from 1975 to 2014. So as we can see here, the darker the color is, the higher obesity rate is. So we can see within those 40 years, the color rapidly changed from light yellow or even white to dark red. So that's quite shocking. And now let's look at some fact. So according to a survey across 180 countries, the obesity rate has almost got tripled since 1975, and 39% of the adults are overweight, and 13% of the adults are obese. This is really bad, but the situation in the U.S. is even worse. So although the obesity rate also got almost tripled, but the benchmark or the baseline is different. So among all the adults in the US, almost 32% of them are overweight, and almost 40% of them are obese. So that's quite alarming. And I checked the latest report from CDC. It looks like 42% of the consumers or adults in the US are obese right now. So you might argue, why would I care? Well, all body types have their beauty. And I totally agree with you that we should accept, respect, and acknowledge the beauty from different body shapes. But one thing we need to be careful about, and that is the health consequence of obesity. So obesity has been studied a lot, and it has been related to a lot of chronic disease like a heart attack, heart problem, diabetes, and high blood pressure. So even if we don't care about the body shape, like we need to be aware of this health consequence, right? And you might argue, like, yeah, so what? Like, I'm not one of them. I'm not obese. Why would I care? It also matters to those who are not obese, because the increased obesity rate is associated with increased medical costs or healthcare costs, and this increased insurance premium and a decrease in the productivity in the labor market. So based on the estimate, so the estimated healthcare costs associated with obesity is over $190 billion per year. So that's a lot. And even if you are not obese, but you pay tax, and a good proportion of your tax will go to the healthcare system. So that means obesity would also matter to you as well. So with that being said, I hope this slide just convince you that obesity is an important issue and we should pay attention to it and we should be alert. Okay?
Excuse me? Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering about the statistics here. I mean, the contrast between the worldwide statistics and the US numbers. It seems US has way more severe, say, obesity problems, judging by the numbers. The worldwide number is like a 13%, but the US almost 40%, right?
Yeah.
But why does US have less overweighted population compared with the world?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I'm going to define what is overweight, what is obese in a few slides.
Yeah.
So basically what you can think about is overweight is a lighter version of obese.
Yeah, that I get, but it seems these two should be somehow correlated, right?
If you think about this question as if we look at consumers who are overweight and above, you see like a US has like the number in the US is much higher. Like overweight plus obese, that's almost like 70% of the adults are overweight and above.
Okay.
So I'm gonna define what is overweight, what is obese. 你可以把这个 overweight 理解成超重，然后 obese 就是肥胖，就是超重还没有到达肥胖的状态。
所以这里的超重是没有包含肥胖的超重，对吧？就是普通的。OK，I get it。
就是这是一个 BMI bracket， 我们一会儿会 define 这个 BMI bracket， 非常好的问题。
OK。
So we're certainly not the first researchers studying what causes obesity. In fact, there's a vast literature trying to investigate what causes obesity. And the reason that the researchers are so keen on this question is we care about obesity because we want to know what causes it. Only know what causes obesity, we are able to define or design an effective policy or intervention to help consumers or to curb obesity. Okay, in order to design the effective policy to help the consumers who need the help the most, we need to know the reason. And now let's see what the researchers has talked about or has found. So a lot of the research is related to this concept called calorie in, calorie out. So one type of research, they argue that, the jobs nowadays involves less physical labor. So that contributes to the obesity. So imagine old days, we have to work in the farm or in the factory. That requires a very high level of physical activity. But now all we need to do is to sit in an office and facing the computer, sitting there all day, right? So that means that every day, our daily calorie expended has been decreasing. So that's one of the reasons for obesity. And another type of research suggests that the technological innovation has lowered the food price. So basically, the firms are able to produce food at a much lower cost, especially for those processed food, because of the technology improvement. So for a given number of a budget or given amount of budget, consumers are able to buy a lot more food, especially for those processed food. that means the calorie intake or calorie consumed by consumer is much higher than before. And some other research has trying to link obesity with other social economic factors like immigration, races, income, and others. And some of them come up with the idea of food desert. The concept of food desert, which is basically consumers are living in the area where they do not have access to healthy food, so that they are forced to consume those unhealthy food. And then that contribute to obesity. But unfortunately, there's no consensus in research what really causes obesity. But one thing that the researchers seem to agree on, that is the weight increases are the result of imbalance of calorie expended and calorie consumed. So as Kotler 2003 point out, since 1980s, so the calorie expended by consumers has not changed much. But the calorie consumed by consumer has increased sharply. So that suggests there's an important avenue for research, that is to investigate the consumer's diet and their obesity status. So that's exactly where we think our paper could fit in. 那大家如果有什么问题的话，就随时提问。So this is more like a descriptive paper. We utilize a very unique data set that links individual food purchase to their health outcomes. And this is the first paper coming from this unique data set. So we are just trying to document how does a food purchase pattern vary across different obesity status. But if the empirical evidence or the empirical pattern we documented is right, that means our paper will have important policy implications. But before I talk about those literature, this analysis, I want to give you a preview of our empirical finding. So first, consumers with higher BMI, I'm going to define what is a BMI later, but higher BMI basically means higher weight, but it's more comprehensive, more accurate than weight. So higher BMI, consumers with higher BMI, they have a higher demand for those wise goods. Again, I'm going to define what is wise goods later, but for now, you can just interpret the wise goods as those tempting and unhealthy food. For example, ice cream, potato chips, bakery, dessert. So they have a higher demand for those goods. That's probably not surprising. That's within expectation, but interesting, we find consumers with higher BMI, they are more price sensitive, but only for those wise goods. We didn't find any significant interaction between BMI and the price sensitivity in the comparable non-wise category. And then we were wondering, can this relationship between BMI and the price sensitivity change or not? So we find if a consumer have successfully lost weight, say from obese to overweight, then his or her price sensitivity will be significantly lower for those wise goods. So that kind of suggests, so if you have a lost weight, then your price sensitivity will be much lower. And then we want to make sure that the empirical finding is not trivial. So we did a small but very cute counterfactual exercise. So we just assume there's a 10% increase in price for those wise goods, and then we compute what would be the change in their consumption. We find consumers with a higher BMI, they would actually reduce their consumption by 17 to 40%. And that would lead to a decrease in obesity rate by 0.75%. Okay? So in the end, we try to structurally interpret our results, see what kind of theory could explain our empirical patterns. So we set up a model of a dual self model of a self-control. And that basically, I'm going to talk about that later in detail, but for now, you can just think about it as every decision maker decision is governed by two selves in his mind. One is called a planner, who's always plan ahead, who always think about the future. And there's another self called a doer, who's myopic, only care about the immediate reward. So the two are gonna play a game, and whoever wins gonna make the decision. So basically, we find our empirical model, empirical finding is more consistent with this self-control model. We also consider two other alternative explanations, but we find this two, our empirical evidence could not fully support this two. So our overall conclusion is that our empirical analysis is more consistent with this self-control model. Okay. So given the time limit, I'm not going to talk about the literature review in details. So basically, the main takeaway is that in previous literature, there's not a lot of paper who's able to link individual purchase data with their health outcome, with only a few exceptions that I'm listing here. But they are either focusing on different disease like a diabetes, or focusing on a different research question or different methodology. And some other literature try to link consumers' food choice with the self-control, but like Alcott, he measured the self-control directly. And the Amy author's paper trying to use consumers' diet change to kind of show there's some self-control issue with consumers who got diagnosed as diabetes. So I hope till this point you have an overall idea what the paper is about, what could be the potential contributions of the paper. Okay. So now I want to talk about the data. So as I mentioned, our paper heavily rely on a very unique data set that we constructed. So the data set actually comes from three sources. So one is the IRI consumer panel, which is a standard popular consumer panel or data sets that is available to a lot of people and is frequently used in empirical IO and quant marketing. So it's basically a data set that tracks consumers' grocery purchase every time when they go to the supermarket. So basically from this data set, what we can observe is what the consumer buys in the supermarket every time he goes to the supermarket, how much he paid, and which store he shops. And every year, the IRI would send an annual survey to those consumers, asking them demographic information like what's your education, what is your occupation, and what is your income, and so on. So that is a fairly standard data set. But the highlight or the unique part of our data set is the second source, which is the II map profiler data. So it's also an annual survey that's sent to those consumers in this consumer panel every November. And roughly 70 to 80% of consumers in the first data set, in this consumer panel, they respond. And in addition to asking them those demographic information, this survey mainly focuses on the health outcome. So it's going to ask consumers their height, weight, and their health. Are they suffering from all kind of a disease or not? Like I couldn't even know I couldn't even pronounce the name starting from A to Z. And their habit and like whether they are eating 5 type of fruit and vegetables or not. Like whether they exercise or not. A lot of very, very comprehensive questions regarding their lifestyle, habit, and health outcome. Okay. But in our analysis, we restrict the analysis in one-member household. So the reason why we only look at a one-member household is that we want to make sure that the shopper in the household is the one who consumes the goods he buys. And then we also try to make sure that our one-member household is representative. So we provide additional evidence showing that it's fairly representative. That means our result, even if we are only looking at a one-member household, our result could be generalized. And roughly every year we have 8,000 to 10,000 households per year. The third source of the data comes from a Nielsen retail scanner data. So that data basically tells you the shelf price. So we could impute the store level weekly price. So overall, by combining these three data sets together, overall what we could observe is what the consumer buys in the supermarket and what price he faces, and every year his weight, height, and all this health outcome changes. Okay. So as I mentioned, this is a very, very comprehensive data set. So now I want to show you the number of households in the data. So here, this table shows you the number of households in the consumer panel in Map Profiler, one-member household in the consumer panel, and one-member household in the Map Profiler. As I mentioned, roughly 70 to 80% of the consumers in HomeScan responded the Map Profiler data. And if we only look at our sample, which is one-member household, each year we get 8,000 to 10,000 households. So remember, this is not the 8,000 to 1,000 observations. Is for each of the household, we know exactly every trip exactly what he buys and what price he faces. And the main purpose of this project or this paper is try to see how the food purchase pattern vary across different obesity status. So we need to define what is obesity status. Back to Penn's question before. So why overweight, obese? What are they? So this is how we define overweight, obese, extreme obese. Again, it's not we define it, it's commonly used in clinical practice. Okay. So in order to define one's obesity, we need to rely on BMI. BMI is the most frequently or commonly used measure in clinical practice to measure one's body fat because it's highly correlated with one's body fat. And BMI is defined as a weight in kilogram over the height square in meters. So basically, if we know one consumer's height and weight, we could compute his BMI. And then based on his BMI, we can classify consumers into different groups. We call that BMI bracket. So if you go to those government website, WHO or NIH, you can find that's how they define different BMI bracket. So suppose your BMI is lower than 18.5, that means you'll be underweight. And if your BMI is over 40, you'll be classified as extreme obese. So there are two purposes of this table. So one is we see the distribution of BMI bracket in our sample. So there's a very, very few consumers in our sample are underweight, and over 70% of them are overweight and above. Quite shocking, right? And then the second purpose of this table is to see whether our one member sample is representative or not. So the third column shows the distribution of the whole US population. The comparison basically shows that they are fairly consistent. So basically that means our one-member household is fairly representative. OK? 大家有什么问题可以随时提问。So as I mentioned before, obesity is associated with a bunch of chronic disease. So this table has 4 panels. So we list the 4 disease, chronic disease that could be correlated with obesity, like a heart attack, heart problem, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes. So basic 就是心脏的问题，高血压和糖尿病。And it shows how consumers from different BMI bracket, how they treat or whether they suffer from those chronic disease or not. But the overall pattern shows that as your weight BMI increases, or as your BMI bracket increases, you are more likely to suffer from those chronic disease, and you are more likely to take medications prescribed by the doctors. So I'll just give you one simple example, like a type 2 diabetes, like 糖尿病. Among those extreme obese consumers, almost 25% of them are taking the prescribed drugs. While for healthy consumer, only 3 of them are taking medication or drugs from the doctor.
鲍老师，就是 just clarification， 就是这里面的那个 RX 和 OTC 分别代表的是什么意思？
好问题，我应该讲再细致一点。RX only 意思就是说这个医生给你开的处方药。OTC 就是非处方药，就是你可以在这种 drugstore， 就是药店里买，就是不用医生处方可以买到的。然后 Duer 就是两种都用。
OK。
对，就是我觉得你可以简单的把它们想理解成 RX only， 可能就是说你这个情况稍微严重一些。然后 OTC 就是 over the counter， 就那个非处方药，就是可能就没有那么严重。然后 Duer 就是你两种都用。然后 suffer 就是你可能觉得自己这个血压不太行，但是你又没有做任何的，就是你也没有 take 这种非处方药，你也没有 take 这种处方药。然后 non-suffers 就是说我没有这个问题。
OK， 感谢。
So, you might have a question like how do consumers from different BMI bracket perceive themselves? So this table has 3 panels. We listed 3 questions. The first is, are you concerned about your weight or not? So as we can see that as the consumers' BMI increases, they recognize their weight issue. They are more concerned about their weight. And the second question asks them, how would you describe your weight? So something interesting here. So for consumers who's in the healthy range, a good portion of them, like 22% of them, would describe themselves as slightly overweight. But for obese consumer, over 50% of them would describe them as slightly overweight. So it seems there's some discrepancy here. And the third question, we just asking them, like, how are you treating obesity? So as I mentioned, obesity itself is a disease. 所以就是肥胖症本身就是一种疾病。Again, like, are you taking the medications, or are you taking the OTC, the over-the-counter drugs, or you are treating your obesity using both, or you are suffering from it but do not treat? As we can see here, although a lot of people who's in the obese and the extreme obese category, they suffer from it, but very few of them are taking medications to treat it. So the reason I'm showing this 2 tables is later we're gonna leverage those questions to exclude some of the explanations. So now you have an overview what the data is about, how the data is coming from. Okay. So now let's talk about the empirical finding. So again, like a main question is how the food purchase pattern vary across different obesity status. So first thing comes first. In order to answer that question, our first reaction would be, how would they spend their monthly, like how would they, what is their monthly spending looks like? How would they distribute their monthly spending on different types of food, right? So our first thing is to see how the monthly food expenditure share vary across different BMI bracket. So here, these categories are defined by IRI consumer panel. So it's called department code. So it includes the dry grocery, frozen food, dairy, deli, packaged meat, fresh produce, alcohol, and magnet data. Dairy 就是那个奶制品 ，deli 就是类似于超市的那种熟
食，对。
对，熟食。package meat 就是你打包好的那种 meat， 然后 fresh produce 就类似于新鲜的水果、蔬菜这种东西。alcohol 就是酒类。So across the 5 BMI, so we just try to see like how consumers from different BMI bracket, how they allocate their monthly food expenditure. So among those categories, fresh produce is always recommended by USDA food guidance. So every year, if you look at the USDA food guidance, they will always recommend you increase the consumption of those fresh produce. So it's always perceived or always be treated as like a healthy food. And we can see that compared to those healthy consumers or overweight consumers, like obese, extreme obese consumer, they have a significant lower share in those fresh produce. And some other categories, like a deli, packaged meat, so 熟食这种东西, like is known for not that healthy. And we can see that the consumers from obese and extremist obese groups, they have a significant higher share in those categories compared to consumers in healthy and overweight groups. So that suggests that it looks like a consumer with a higher BMI, they kind of spend more on those unhealthy food categories. But for some of the categories, like a dry grocery or frozen food, 冷冻食品, it's hard to know whether it's good or not because it might include some healthy stuff like a frozen vegetable, 冷冻的蔬菜, or a frozen bar, 冰棍儿, that is unhealthy. Frozen dessert, like 冷冻的这种甜点. So it's hard to know whether frozen food is counted as healthy or unhealthy. So what we do is we look at that from a more refined categories. So it's also that we didn't define this category is from the IRI consumer panel, and it's called the product module. So we look at the 14 categories. Among those 14 categories, vegetable, fruits, frozen vegetable, salad, pasta 就是意面，是这里的 pasta 是指那种干的 pasta， 就是类似于干面条那种东西。Okay, so those food are commonly perceived as a healthy food. As we can see here, as your weight increases or as your BMI bracket increases, you see consumers have a smaller share or lower share on those healthy categories. So similarly, for those unhealthy categories, like ice cream, 冰淇淋, dessert, 甜点, snacks, 这里like snacks, like 零食. Consumers in obese and extreme obese, they have a significant higher share in those categories. And the one thing I want to point out is for diet soda and regular soda. So for regular soda, extreme obese and obese consumer, they actually have a lower share in their monthly spending on it compared to overweight consumers. we think it could be due to those publicity, like all the news and social media were talking about soda. It's just been like a sugary water, has no nutrition benefit, but only sugar in it. And for diet soda, extreme obese consumer and obese consumer, they have a significantly higher share for diet soda. Okay, so that's basically the overview or the overall pattern on the monthly food expenditure share. So previous literature also suggests that the products sold at the checkout lane, like 收银台附近的那些 products, are designed to exploit consumers' temptation. So we just want to confirm or want to see if that's really true or not. If it is really true that consumers with a higher BMI, they are more likely to purchase a product at the checkout lane. So here we look at the two product categories. One is chocolate bar. The other is magazine. So magazine is mainly referred to those gossip magazine, 就那种八卦杂志, whose covers are always very, very eye-catching. So here we can see that as consumers' weight increases, they are more likely to purchase the product sold at the checkout lane, even if we include a lot of controls, like we control for their income, education, their age, gender, and everything. We still find that it's pretty robust that consumers with a higher BMI, they are more likely to purchase a product at the checkout lane. Okay, so you might say, oh, so the general pattern does show that the consumers with a higher BMI, they have a higher demand for those white goods, but it could due to a lot of other reasons, confounding reasons like income or even unobserved stuff. So for the next part, we're going to focus on the price sensitivity, and we'll try to use econometric models to control for those confounding factors. But to make sure that our analysis is manageable, because we can't do like 50 categories, that's just too much. So we rely on the paper, a working paper by Thomas and his co-author in 2012. So what they did is they asked a lot of students to rate 100 food items sold in the supermarket. They asked the consumers to rate the product based on how impulsive they are and how healthy they are. And then they come up with the index called the Weiss index. And as you could imagine, like for a product that's high in fat, sugar, or salt, they have a high Weiss index. And we also want to make sure that first, our product selection would be representative, but also they are popular in the sense that there are a lot of people buying it. Otherwise, we cannot identify those coefficients. So in the end, we want to cover product categories that's frozen, storable, and perishable. So in the end, we pin down like 3 Weiss categories. Again, Weiss goods is defined as those unhealthy goods, which consumer would purchase impulsively and feels regret after purchasing that. So again, you can simply interpret that as unhealthy but very tempting. So for Weiss goods, we focus on 3 categories: ice cream, which is frozen, baked dessert, which is perishable, and potato chips, which is storable. Like 冰淇淋是冷冻的，然后 baked dessert 就是类似于烘焙的那种甜点，它们就不能放很久，然后 potato chips 就可以放很久。And in order to make sure that our analysis is not is only like we only have the significant effect for the Weiss goods, and we also pick 3 comparable non-vice goods, like a frozen vegetable, also which is also frozen, that's comparable to ice cream, and a packaged salad 就是那种袋装或者盒装的那种沙拉 ，that's perishable 就是也是不能放很久，然后 dry pasta which is storable, that's comparable to the potato chips. So in the end, we're going to focus on these 6 categories to do the price sensitivity analysis. So as I just mentioned, for the general pattern, it could be other reasons driving the result. So we want to control those confounding factors. So we use 2 approaches. First is called non-parametric demand analysis. So what we do is we bin each of the category price into 10 groups. And for each of the group, we regress the purchase dummy on a rich set of demographic dummy variables, including their BMI. And then we plot the predicted demand for consumers with obesity and without obesity, while holding the other demographic variable fixed. So basically, you can think about each of the decile, like our regression is like this. And this is our non-parametric demand curve. So it's fairly clear here, like for the red line, that's the predicted demand for consumers, for obese consumer. Again, like an obese consumer here is defined for, is defined as, 1 second, obese and extreme obese is defined for consumers BMI bracket in obese and extreme obese. And the blue line represents the predicted demand for consumers who's either healthy or overweight. And then what we see here is consumers who's obese or extreme obese, their demand is higher than consumers who's not obese. And the demand curve is relatively flatter, representing or implying that those obese consumers, they are more price sensitive. This is for the wise categories, those tempting, unhealthy categories. We did the same thing for the non-wise categories. And we see that there's no difference between the demand for the obese consumer and non-obese consumer. So this basically shows that looks like obese consumer, they have a higher demand, they are more price sensitive. But you might argue that, oh, you just controlled for those observed characteristics like income, like education. But what if it is unobserved heterogeneity, unobserved characteristics? So then we did the regression analysis. We use the individual fixed effect. Again, here the individual fixed effect is essentially household fixed effect because we only look at one member household. This is the main regression analysis we did. So the dependent variable is whether a consumer purchased a category or not, purchase a category J or not in the trip T is either 0 or 1. And the independent variable include the BMI and the price. Here we look at the price either in log form or level form. And then the interaction between BMI and the price. And then someone might, like a previous literature shows income could be an important factor affecting BMI and the price sensitivity. So in order to control for the fact that the income might affect the price sensitivity, we also control for income and the interaction between income and price sensitivity and the price. We also control for the week, and the alpha ij here represent the individual fixed effect. And in our analysis, we look at a single member household who's under 65 years old. A couple of reasons for this. First, for consumers who are over 65, the BMI guidance will be different. It's not a good measure for the elderly. BMI is not a good measure for the elderly. The second, it's very likely that consumers get retired around 65. Basically, over 70% of the consumers would retire at the age of 64 or 65. So once you get retired, your lifestyle attitude will be different. So we only focus on consumers who's working, who's not retired. And you might have a question that is your food consumption increase your BMI, affect your BMI, or your BMI affect your price? So in order to control for that, we only look at the 3 months window. So basically what we think is within 3 months, it's very unlikely that your BMI will change. So it's not whatever I eat within that 3 months that changed my BMI. We just shut down that route. So we focus on 3 months window, and later on we did the robustness check for a longer period of time, for a longer window, and the results still hold. Oh. So one more thing about those variables. So the BMI essentially comes from the IR MAP profiler data, and the price comes from a Nielsen retail scanner data. And the price income BMI is income stuff comes from the consumer panel, and the week comes from the consumer panel. Basically, that's why we are able to run this regression, because we combined the 3 data sets together.
鲍老师，
大家有什么问题吗？
我就比较好奇，就是你在这个回归里面有没有考虑就是其他 category 的价格呢？
好问题啊。我们这面就只是讲的这种category level 的 purchase。
对。
然后我们是没有怎么说呢？我想一下怎么给你解释这个问题。
因为
一般情况下，我们 implicit assumption 就是我们讲所有的 choice model、logistic model，其实我们的 implicit assumption 都是只有我考虑的这个 category 影响我自己的这个 utility。这也是很多就是 structural model 他们怎么去 identify 这个 price 的，就是他们做 identification 的时候，就是利用了我这个东西的价格变化，就其他东西我这个东西价格变化不影响其他东西的价格，所以我们在这里面是没有考虑其他东西的价格。但是我明白你的意思是说有没有可能有这种 cross price elasticity， 就是如果这个价格变了，它有没有可能去 switch 到其他的？
尤其是比如说像这种 vice product 本来是满足这种就是短期的这种享受嘛，对吧？我有没有可能就是发现某一个 category 价格都很高了，我就 compensate on the other category？
这个我们在这个 paper 里面没有考虑，因为这个就涉及到这种就是它有一个 demand system， 就是你要去 identify 这个 price cross price elasticity。就我们在这里面就相当于你可以把它理解成我们只考虑 own price elasticity。
OK， 然后
对，就是我们做到的我们即使的所有的 estimate 你可以把它想成是一个 upper bound。
对，因为我就比较好奇的就是会不会那些 BMI 更高的人，他们在面对这个 vice products 的时候，他会更有可能去 compensate across category。但我只是一个猜想啊，就是如果是那样的话，就意味着你单纯的涨价，或者是给他们就是比如说对这个某一个 category 进行 heavy tax， 可能效果就没那么好，他们就会 switch 到其他的这种 vice category 里面去了。
对。
但或者说他们真的是不买了，如果是不买的话，就证明就是那么这个涨价可能真的是一个很好的 policy。
对，你的这一点就是你的 intuition 就特别 特别准确。这是我们想做的另外一个 project。
OK，
因为这个就涉及到你具体要 tax 哪一些 category， 要 tax 多少，在多少的 rate， 这个就是需要更复杂的，就是要 demand system、demand estimation， 然后还需要一个就是需要做那个 structural 的东西。我们在这里面就简单的只是做了一个descriptive 的东西，然后我们是有考虑想做你那个就是更 policy 相关的。就是 tax 哪一些 category， 当然考虑到它的 cross price elasticity， 然后至于 tax 多少 rate， 这个是另外就是可以是另外一篇 paper。OK，
另外一个就是 clarification question， 就是那个 category price 你们是怎么算出来的呢
？weighted average， 就是因为我们有这个 store data。store data 里面就是它是有这个 store 每一周的这个 sales， 然后还有这个 price， 我们就是用它的这个 weighted average， 我们也用了 direct 的这个 average， 其实没有太大的差别，但是我们觉得就是这种 weighted average 更能考虑到这个 consumer 就是 demand 的这个问题，所以我们最后是用的这个weighted average。当然我们 construct data 的时候也 construct straight average。OK，
所以 weighted average 是 weighted based on demand， not based on supply， 对吧
？based on sales。
对啊 ，sales 是实际上大家买的那个什么，所以就是那些会不会就是说那些个 more popular item， 或者说现在正有 price cut 的这些 item， 它会被 overweighted？比如说我现在正在有一个价格促销，那么我的销量可能就会比其他的那几个竞品就会更好嘛。那么就是在计算平均价格的时候，那这个搞促销的它可能就一下子就把这个整体的那个平均价就拉下来了。
对，这也是为什么我们要用这个 weighted average 的原因。就是我们想要的这个 price， 就是你 consumer 他去超市面临的这个价格。并不是说他付的这个价格。那如果这个东西它在 on sale 的话，那我根据我 weighted average price， 它有可能是 lower， 那就是因为它在 on sale consumer 面临的价格就会低一些。对。当然这个 price 就是就是我们 IO 和我们 quant 的，就是我们一般 construct 这个 price 的时候，就大家都是这么，就是基本上大家都是用这个 weighted average price。OK，
got it，thank you。
鲍老师，你好，我想问一下，就是在您的这个数据里面是weekly level 的是吧？就是现在这个 T 是 based on week？
不是，是 based on trip。你每一次去超市。
OK， 那但是你的这个 BMI 和那个 income 它是每多久就是 surveys 啊？就是你的这个 BMI income 每一年对吧？所以在这一年中这些数据没有变，其实在这个方程中唯一变的就是 price 是吗？
对，因为我的这个 DV， 我的这个你买没买是一个 trip level 的嘛。然后我的 BMI 和 income 确实在这一年是不会变，但因为我们有6年的 data， 然后6年之内就是我们是能够看到这个 BMI 它是有变化的，这也是为什么我们能够 identify 这个 coefficient 的原因。
OK， 明白了。另外就是我还有一个问题，就是你的 DV 是一个就是01变量嘛？然后为什么用 regression 而不用 logit 或者 probit 啊？
好问题。我有2个解释。第一个呢是我们也做了 logit， 然后在 robustness check 里面，就是它也是 consistent 的，就是这个结果还是就是原来 significant 还是 significant。第二个呢是不管是 logistic regression、logit model 还是 linear regression， 我们 它们的区别就是在于 error term 它的 distribution 不一样。Logit 里面我们假设它是 type 1 extreme distributed， 然后这个 linear probability model 我们假设它 normally distributed， 但问题是我们没有人知道它的 error term 到底是一个什么样子的 distribution。那既然大家都是猜的，就是并没有说谁更好谁不好的问题。就是大家对这个 linear probability 最大的诟病就是说，那我做 prediction 的时候，你有可能你的这个 purchase probability 大于1，但因为我们在这里面更在意的是我这个 coefficient， 更在乎它这个就是 beta， 而不是在乎我这个 prediction， 所以我这个即使它 predicted 的这个 probability 大于1，也并没有太大的关系。然后再加上 linear regression 这个它也就是比较快嘛。就是它比那个 Logit 的那个速度要快一些，然后大家就是都是基于 assumption， 就是大家都有这个，我记得那个有一个，我不知道大家有没有读过，都差不多。其实我们最后做 robustness check 的时候，也会发现它 coefficient 也没有差特别多。对的。
OK， 另外我想问一下，就是在你们这个数据里面，就是他们是多久就是有一个 purchase 在这个 store？
多久有一次？有最 frequent 的就是一天有好几次，不 frequent 的时候可能就是比如说几周一次。
OK， 那它在这里面就是说，这个 Y 的话，就是说这个 Y 它的就是0101嘛，它的这个1的就是它的就是这个 frequency 这个概率频率有多大呀
？20% maybe， 可能 20%， 我不太能记得清了，大概是 20%。
OK， 明白，好的，谢谢。
这就是为什么我们想选这些 category 的时候，我们需要它 popular enough。就是你可以看到，就是这几个 category 都是有很多 purchase 在里面的。因为我们还有另外一篇 paper， 那篇 paper 看的 category 就比较多，包括一些比如说什么棉花糖、布丁这种东西，他们那种买的人就很少，要比 ice cream、potato chips， 和这种 baked dessert 要大概是他们的可能1/10或者是1/5。就是我们在选的时候也是尽量让它足够的 representative， 然后又有足够的 purchase， 但是即使它有足够的 purchase 也是 20% maybe or at most。
OK， 好的，谢谢。
鲍老师，就刚好你提到了 category 嘛，我就比较好奇，就因为你之前举例子的时候举到了 alcohol， 就是酒类嘛，然后这里面我看你的 vice non-vice 里是没有包含酒类的，是吧？
对，我们在这里面就没有用任何的这种 liquid。
因为我之所以不好意思，我之所以问这个问题，就是我觉得比较好奇的是，因为首先酒类它可以算是一个 vice product， 但它同时呢好像和你的那个比如说你的热量摄入啊和这个肥胖又不是那么直接的相关。我就比较好奇，就因为你举这几个 vice 它都是高糖高油嘛，就是它和你的那个 obesity 是一个有直接相关，它吃的人也知道吃这个对肥胖不好。那酒的话呢，它算一个 vice， 就是算一个就是这种享乐消费，但好像又不是直接和这个体重什么的相关，所以就比较好奇，那些个高 BMI 的人，他会不会对酒类价格弹性也很高？我就是真的就是单纯的好奇，就是会不会这个能 spill over 到就是一个 non-fat related vice product？ 对，
这是一个特别好的问题。我们确实没有看 alcohol， 但是我自己的 prediction 就是说，很有可能他们的 demand 会更高一些，因为我们看这个 Gossip Magazine 这种八卦杂志对体重也没有任何影响，我们仍然可以看到他们更容易去买。但是至于说它的 price sensitivity 这个我就不是特别的能确定。原因 就是我们可以回去看一下，就是这个我没办法给你答案，但是我觉得是一个特别好的下一个 paper 的 topic。
对他们的那个 self control 理论上应该会比较低嘛，一般就是 on average BMI 高的人，他 self control 应该会低一点，对吧？
对，理论上来说，但是也有 research 说，哎呀，酒类它也是从 carb 里面生产出来的，所以它也有可能
也是直接相关。OK。
对，但是就不像说高油高糖这种这么直接的关系。然后我们一般讲这种 junk food tax， 从来就没有考虑过酒类的 tax， 对不对
？OK。哎，另外那个 pasta 不算是就是高碳水吗？我不太清楚为什么。
它是高碳水，但是它，哎，这个因为我这个长期减肥 ，pasta 这个东西，它是高碳水，但是呢，它又跟白米又不太一样，它是那个叫什么 GI 比较低，所以就是它其实相对来说是比较 healthy 的。
OK。
对，但是如果我们只看这3个 category， 就是 fat、sugar、salt， 这 pasta 确实都不占。然后从这个 Thomas 这篇 paper 里面，就是 pasta 确实也不是在它的这个 WISE index 里面特别靠前的，其实它就属于相对来说比较
sugar 它占吧 ，carb 就是 sugar 嘛。
对，那我们选的时候就主要依靠那篇 paper， 但你 carbs。它这里边的 sugar 有可能是指这种直接的这种就是 sugar， 就是类似于糖果、巧克力啊，然后甜点这种 sugar， 而不是说就是葡萄糖，就是我们 carbs 转成的这个。
OK， 多谢。
但是是一个很好的点，我们可以提一下在那里边。OK。
哎，那个鲍老师，不好意思，我想再问一下，就是你那个parametric demand analysis 的那个图是怎么画出来的呀？
就是相当于你把这个 price 把它分成10块，就是 top 10%， 然后 10 to 20%， 20 to 30%， 然后每一个这个 decile， 然后你跑一个 regression， 然后跑出它的这个 predicted 的这个 demand， 因为它的这个
OK， 你说，
因为它的这个 y 是 price 嘛。
对，那你就是你的 XIT， 这个是什么呀？
XIT 就相当于是我的这些所有的 demographic 就能够 observe 的这个 demographics， 比如说我的 income， 我的 education， 我的 age， 我的什么什么之类的。
然后您上面有一个 with or without obesity holding， 就是说这里面的这个 obesity 是一个dummy吗？
我这个 with without obesity 就是相当于我把它分成，我就专门跑了2种，就是一个是在那个 BMI bracket 里面是 obese 和 extreme obese， 然后我跑一个，然后另外一个是就是healthy 啊 overweight 然后他们是另外一个，然后我看他们的 coefficient 做出 predict 的这个 demand， 然后把他们画。
OK， 明白。
所以这个是我们主要的这一个 regression analysis 的这个 function。然后我们可以看一下这个结果。So we did 2 functional form just to make sure that the result is not is a robust with different functional form of price. So we use the log price and the level price. As we can see here, for all the 3 wise goods, consumers with a higher BMI, they are more price sensitive. So this interaction term represents that the higher BMI consumers, they are more price sensitive because the coefficient is negative and significant. So we did the same thing for the non-wise goods. And what we see is there's the relationship between BMI and price sensitivity is not there anymore. So the interaction term is not significant. So basically, we don't see that consumers with a higher BMI, they're more price sensitive or less price sensitive than consumers with a lower BMI. This is the main regression analysis. And some of you have asked a question like, why would you use linear probability model? Why not Logit? We tried Logit, it works. And we also tried the different things to make sure that our result is robust. So instead of using 3 months window, every year we use a 3 months window. Now we use a 7 month. We use 11 months. This result is still there. But the caveat of using more month is that within 11 months, there's a chance that your BMI increases. And instead of using BMI, which is a continuous measure, we also use like non-continuous variables like a dummy variable for obese. So for consumers in the BMI bracket as obese, extreme obese, we call them obese. That's a dummy variable. That's exactly how we define, that's exactly how we define obese, non-obese here. And we also use the BMI bracket, those are 5 categories, and the result is fairly robust. And some of you might have a question, why not just use a purchase quantity instead of a purchase incidence? And we find our result is robust if our dependent variable is a quantity, including no purchase. But if we restrict the quantity as a conditional on your purchase, whether you purchase 1 unit, 2 unit, or 3 unit, then we don't find the interaction term be significant. I mean, the reason could be they are not significant, or we don't have enough power to identify it. Most likely is because of the second explanation, because we did look at the number of packages that consumer purchase. Most of the consumer purchase only 1 package. So we don't have enough power to identify this interaction term. So for now, we basically show that there's a positive relationship between BMI and price sensitivity, but only for wise goods, not for non-wise goods. Next question is, can this relationship change? So we look at the 2 things. One is, what if your weight changed? It could be that you put effort, that you avoid purchasing those wise goods and you resist the temptation, and it doesn't matter whether the price increase or decrease, you just resist purchasing it. Then in that case, your price sensitivity might be lower. Or it could be like you have more information about the unhealthy eating, and then your BMI and the price sensitivity, the relationship might change once you have more information or other demographic information like age, or whether you exercise or go to the fast food restaurants or not. And this is what we find. So if you have a successfully lost weight for over the 6 years, then your price sensitivity would be much lower. So BMI and this interaction is negative, but if you lost weight, that's a dummy variable, your price sensitivity would be much lower. And so how we define this lost weight is we compare it at the beginning of the sample, your weight, versus at the end of the sample, your weight, if there's any difference. But since we don't know when you start losing weight, so we just cut it into half, and we just use the half of the time that you are in this sample, and then did the regression. We also try to only look at the last year, and the result is still there. So as I mentioned, there could be other factors like information demographics that could change your price sensitivity, but we didn't find any evidence that those factors would moderate the positive relationship between BMI and price sensitivity. So basically that means even if you have more information about the healthy eating or the consequence of unhealthy eating, that won't change your price sensitivity. Okay. And later, we want to make sure that our analysis or our result is not trivial. So what we did is we did a simple back to envelope counterfactual exercise to see what if we increase the price by 10% for those wise goods like ice cream, potato chips, and baked dessert. And how would that affect the food purchase and the obesity rate? So what we find is a 10% price increase would actually reduce the consumption for obese by 17 to 40% more than consumers who are not obese. And that would actually lead to 0.75% decrease in obesity rate. But again, there's a caveat with this small exercise. Exactly like what Peng just described, we didn't consider any cross-price elasticity. It could be that once we impose a tax on soda or Coke, consumers will switch to juice or other like energy drink. So we didn't consider that. We didn't consider cross-product substitute. So whatever we see the effect here, 0.75%, that could be upper bound of the tax. And in the end, we just try to see if, let me see if I have enough time. 我还有多长时间？
你就展开说就可以。
Okay. So in the end, and then we want to structurally interpret our empirical result. And then we set up a model of a do-yourself model of self-control. And this is based on Gao and Persanov's paper and the Bonambo and Pasia's paper and also Rachel Griffith's paper. So as I mentioned, there are two selves in our mind, in each of us mind. One is called a planner, one is called doer. Planner would always try to avoid the temptation because they think about the future. They know that it's not good for your health or for your it's not good for your health to consume those wise goods. And there's another one called a doer who's always giving in temptation and always enjoy the immediate reward, always want to buy those wise goods. And then every time when you make a purchase, these two selves play a game. And then whoever wins the game makes a decision. For example, if the planner wins, then the planner would, then you would choose not to make the purchase. If the doer wins, then you will always purchase the wise goods. And shown by Rachel Griffith paper, there's a one-on-one mapping on the self win, the probability that the self wins versus the probability of whether you purchase the wise goods or not. So in particular, the probability that the doer wins is can be reflected on the probability of your purchase those wise goods. And then we use a parameter K to capture the salience of the future harm, basically how much weight that the consumer, the planner put on the future harm of those consuming those wise goods. And we show that as the less weight you put on the future harm, then you are more likely to purchase the wise goods and you're more price sensitive. And we also consider two other explanations. One is intrinsic preference. Basically, the explanation is that it could be simply that the individuals like wise goods. So in basic economics, if you like something, if you have a high preference for something, that means you would be less price sensitive. But we are able, we could always find some functional form that makes the prediction that the consumers with a higher preference are more price sensitive. But that requires more requirement. But one thing that this particular explanation could not explain is that if consumers with a higher BMI, they simply prefer the wise goods, why would they lose weight? Why would they? When they lose weight, why would the price sensitivity get lower? So you might argue, it could be they changed their preference. But you can explain everything with the explanation that, I changed my preference, right? So that's in economics, we normally assume one's preference is stable. So that means that this explanation, this intrinsic preference, could not fully capture or explain our empirical findings. The other alternative is the information. So someone might argue that, oh, maybe the consumers with a higher BMI, they don't know the consequence of unhealthy eating, so that they are more price sensitive. But what we find is, if you have obese-related disease, like a high cholesterol type 2 diabetes, 高血压糖尿病, like if you have those disease, then you will see the doctor. The doctor will tell you the consequence of unhealthy eating. They will tell you information about the healthy eating. Then you would have the information. But we still see no significant effect of this information changing your price sensitivity. So that means this information explanation could not explain our empirical findings, right? So overall, we find empirical evidence that higher BMI is correlated with a higher demand, higher price sensitivity, but only for white goods. And there will be some important policy implications from it. For example, it suggests that since obese consumers, they are more price sensitive. That means if you put a tax on the white goods, they will be more sensitive. They will reduce their consumption even more. So implying that tax might be effective. And the second is, if you ban the availability of the checkout, you stop selling those tempting chocolate bar at the checkout lane. That might help a little bit. Actually, UK is doing this right now. And there will be other questions, and Peng has suggested like we could do this tax by considering the cross-price elasticity, and that's definitely in our pocket, but we haven't got time to do it. And another paper based on this data set is we look at the in-store promotions, like a feature display and a price cut, like 就是你在超市里看到他们的不同的产品的呈现方式，好多时候你进超市门，你就会发现那种特别 tempting 或者 white goods， 他们摆在特别显眼的地方，或者是你在超市的那个打折的那个广告或者 flyer 上面，你会看到特别 tempting 的这些东西。就是 we want to see what the impact of the in-store promotions and how consumers with different BMI bracket, they respond to those in-store promotions. And that's all I have. 谢谢大家今天来参加，然后大家有什么问题可以随时提问。对，这个就是基本上就是我们的 finding。
OK， 感谢鲍老师，感谢鲍老师。然后咱们在会议室里的同学老师有什么想讨论的，都可以直接和鲍老师一起讨论。然后我先在大家之前，我先问一个，我刚看到好像那个陈老师那边有举手了，那个，对，我先问一个，然后让大家有什么话大家再发言。那个 discussion 里面，其实我本来之前就是想到那个 price cut 的 in general 的价格更敏感。如果他是就是如果他们对价格的敏感性更多 driven by 这种 price promotion 的话，那么其实 heavy tax 也许不会有太多的作用。就是我看到那些个就是享乐型的这些个食品，就是说 OK， 我只要看他给这种 buy one get one free， 或者说他有一个价格的折扣，我就特别想买，就是控制不了那种欲望的话，那么就是单纯的他那个就是那个怎么是 label price 的价格变高了，或者是那个tax 变重了，可能对未必会能有特别明显的效果。
对，我们这一篇其实是发现lower income higher BMI 的人，他们对 price cut 特别敏感，但是如果你是 higher income， 其实并没有那么敏感。我们那篇就大概我们的解释就是说，有可能就是很多时候，如果你的 income 不是特别高的话，有可能你从事的是这种劳动要求比较高的，就可能你要么是 physical 的要求比较高，要么就是你生活在就是 生活压力比较大，然后你可
热量
能
需求比较
花
大，
很多的精力在处理生活上其他的压力，然后你就没有时间和精力去仔细的思考说，哎呀，这个东西它其实是对我不好的，即使它现在在一个特别显眼、特别吸引我的地方，就是你没办法去思考它这个更好的去思考它的 future harm， 你有可能就会 give in temptation， 就不是说它本身就是缺乏 self control，可能就是因为他有其他的生活、其他的压力，用了他更多的这种 mental resource，所以他没有足够的精力去做这个，在这个 food choice 上面去做出一个更加 rational 的这个 decision。但这只是我们的解释，但我觉得你说这一点倒是很好，就是它到底是 driven by the price itself， 还是这个 promotions？ 对。
对，因为那个直接和你们的那个就是 implication for tax 那是直接相关的嘛，对吧？
对，
所以就比较好奇这个。
对，它这个是只有是 lower income 的人比较 significant，lower income higher BMI 的人比较 significant。
哎，那在你的这篇文章里，就是你今天讲的这个里面有没有做这个 income 和那个 BMI 的 interaction 呢？就是
做了，就我们一定要 control 这个东西的，然后结果都在这儿，并没有。
没有看到 BMI 和 income interaction 呢？
哦，
因为你刚才说到是
high
BMI， 就像你刚才说的 promotion 那篇文章是 low income and high BMI， 对吧
？I see。
所以在这个就是你现在
你是说 three-way interaction
那些人对吧？
你是说 three-way interaction 对吧？
对，就是这里的高 BMI 的人更加 persistive， 他会不会是指高 BMI 同时 low income 的那些人？而是说
我可以回去再 check 一下，这个我好像没有过。对，我可以回去 check 一下这个，谢谢。记一下。
对，我看那个咱们观众里陈真老师正好像举手了，陈真老师应该可以直接说话是吧？
哎，是，包老师，其实我觉得我很感兴趣，就是你找到了那个就是他们在减肥的那个时间段的那个数据，我觉得这个特别有意思，而且特别聪明。
对，我们想了很久这个。
就对，我是想看一下那个结果，就是因为我好像看到是不是。就是我很想了解，就是他们在减肥的过程中，他们的行为和其他的就是说普通的状态有什么区别？因为您的数据挺好的嘛，就是6年可以看到很多变化。就是我想问一下，就是为什么在您这里没有加一个 lose weight 的一个单例，就是它的主效应没有在这里面？
weight lower income。
是不是可能是 weight 和这个 price， 因为 weight 是一个0-1变量嘛 ，price 是一个应该是一个就是说一致性变量对吧？
对。
然后我觉得应该可以加一个 lose weight 这样一个单例，这样的话我们能看到就是说在他减肥的时候，他其实这个 ice cream 啊 dessert 它的这个消费是不是有一些不同？
可是 lose weight 它只是就是它不是每一年的，就是这个 lose weight 它就相当于是每一个人这6年它只有这一个 observation， 就是你怎么去 identify 这个。
你的是就是说你这个 lose weight 的这样的一个数据是第1年到第6年，所以你是一个0-1变量嘛，对不对？
对，它只是一个 variable， 就是我们自己 define 这个 loss weight 是指你最后一年的体重和最后一年的 BMI 和第1年 BMI 的比较。
那你在第1年的时候，你把它 define 就是为0嘛，在你的数据就是你的数据结构是什么样？你在第1年就是都为0，然后在最后1年的时候，如果是 还是说你
但是
只
这是
在最后一
individual
年
fixed
这个人？
effect，
那
你这是
你们是不是
individual
6
fixed
年你关
effect，
注的还是？
你没办法去 identify 这个 loss weight。
那你在就是这个 lost weight 的，就是在数据上，那就只是第6年的人才能做这个 regression， 是不是？
对，就是你在这个 sample 最后一年，就是它不是每一年我都有一个这个 loss weight 的，我是因为这个大家也知道，减肥需要花很长的时间啊，不是说你一年就能从 obese 变成一个 healthy 的 people， 就是你减2斤、减5斤可能都很难了，更何况你还要这个 BMI change， 就 BMI 它 define 的是你 kilogram over 你的 height 的 square， 就其实 BMI 很 sticky 的，就是很难去看到它一年之内有什么变化，所以我们看的是整个6年你有什么就是你的体重有一个大的变化，就是比如说我从 extreme obese 变成 obese， 或者我从 obese 变成 overweight， 或者我从 obese 变成 healthy， 然后这都是其实很大的一个跨度嘛，就是 BMI 可能你要 change， 比如说5、3这种。就是这样就已经刷掉了很多人，然后你相当于每一个 household 你只有一个 variable， 就是这个你有没有 loss weight， 因为它不是每一年都有变化的，就是你没办法去 identify 这个 main effect， 你只能说，哎呀，我在这些所有减了肥的这些人里面，我的这些东西就是我的price sensitivity 啊，或者什么怎么变，但是这个不就是已经被这个 loss weight 和这个 log price 这个 capture 了吗？
所以你现在用的这个 sample， 就是你这个回归结果的 sample 是所有 lost weight 的一些人已经拎出来了，是吗？
不是，这是所有的人，只不过他如果是 loss weight 的话，就是他有一个这个档名。我的意思就是说，如果你想只看这个 loss weight 的这些，我这里面是所有的人，但是大部分人都是没有 loss weight 的，就是只有很少的一部分它是有一个 BMI bracket 的 change。
对啊，但是就是你只要是有 lost weight 这个变量的话，那么就你的数据里面就能呈现出有一些人是 lost weight， 有一些人没有 lost weight， 对吧？
但我这是 individual fixed effect。
individual fixed effect，
我这 within individual 的变化。
对，就 individual 的这个 fixed effect，individual 它这个 fixed effect 讲的是你的这个人 I， 然后和 category J 嘛，它和这个你的这个就是 weight 的 loss 这个是你是不能 individual effect 是不能包含这个你的 loss weight 这个变量的呀，因为 loss weight 是时间而变化的变量，不是吗？
它只有一个 variable。
understand， 就是它只有1还是0，就是在这6年里。
这6年它只有这一个 variable， 就是0或者1，它不是我每一年都有一个0或者1。
OK， 明白。所以它是一个每个人只有一个这个变量，所以你就在 fixed effect 里面 observe 是吧 ？observe。
对，所以我没办法有这个 main effect， 因为它没办法 identify。
对，因为你是 fixed effect 里面的。
对。
那我理解了。所以是在就是他在就是减肥的期间的话，他的 price sensitivity 它就是它本来是0.042，现在的话就会变低，对吧？它会没有那么 price sensitive。
对，然后因为在这段期间我们只能知道你减肥成功了，但是我们不知道你什么时候开始减肥的，所以我们就做了几种就是 robustness check 嘛。就第一种是，假如说你在这个 sample 6年，我们就假设你第3年开始减肥，或者是就是第3年开始只看你后3年的这个purchase 的情况。或者只看你后2年的，甚至说我只看你减肥成功那1年的这个 purchase 的情况。就是第一呢是如果你只看最后1年的，你的这个 sample 会丢失很多，但是如果你看的年数太多的话，它就是又有可能 不 accurate， 所以我们最后是选的 half sample， 就是说你在这个 sample 有一半的就是后一半的时间，我们看的这个 t 就相当于是只看我在这个 sample 6年，我只看你后3年的这个每一个 trip 你的 purchase 有没有买。
OK 明白。那你们为什么没有就是每年算一次这个比较啊？这个 lost weight 是一个01变量还是一个就是它是 lost weight 这个就是连续性的呀
？01，原因就是因为这个 BMI 它特别的 sticky， 就是你1年之内很少有什么变化。
OK
就是咱就是自己减肥也能有这种体验。
对，能体现。
减肥很难的，
这个太难了。在多少？就是你减了多少？就是你 BMI 就是变化多少，你才认为它是算一个减肥呀？就是在数据里。
你从 obese 变成下一个 bracket， 你从 obese 变成 overweight， 我们才叫你减肥成功。
OK 明白了。
就是所以它其实要求你减的这个量其实是很大的。
对。好的，我明白了，谢谢巴老师，特别有趣这个研究，而且对于现在我们生活每天吃东西，的确是就是这个减肥是一个大问题。
对，我自己做的时候也是觉得特别的有意思，特别能感同身受。虽然道理都懂，但是还是长胖了。
OK， 还有一个就是我看您最后一个是就是有一个 self， 有一个 planner 和 doer 这个解释。其实这个就是相当于你对结果的一个就是理论上的一个解读，是吧？
对。
但是并没有做一些数据上的，我不是很明白，就是说您这里有一个 parameter K， 这个是怎么体现的呀？
这个就是一个纯的一个比较小的 section， 就是一个 theory 的 section， 就是这个 theory 它具体是做什么的，其实不是特别重要，最重要的就是说我的 prediction 跟我的 empirical 的 result 是 consistent 的。这个 K 你就可以把它想成是这个我每次吃 ice cream 的时候，我对于这个未来吃 ice cream 可能会让我长胖，我 put 多少 weight 在这个 future 的 harm 上面。这是我们现在的解释。
这只是一个理论上的解释，在你的数据里面没有就是这样的一个
对，我们
对吧？
对，没有。我们只是想用一个 theory 来把我们这个 result 可以更加 就是更加 interpretable 吧。
got it， 行，明白了。好的，谢谢范老师。
没事。
正好借着陈老师刚才问的这一页，就是那个 do self model 的，我就比较好奇，就是因为刚才你那个 rule out 那个 intrinsic preference 的时候说，就是那些减肥的人或者减肥成功人，他的那个intrinsic preference 可能不是也许不会变得那么明显，但这个姑且存疑啊，因为我知道很多减肥成功或者说戒烟戒酒成功的人，他们都 claim 就找到了一个 new self， 就是好，仿佛就是整个人都焕然一新了。我不确认是那个 intrinsic preference 会不会就是随着你的减肥成功会发生一个变化。就单说这个 do self model 的话，这个 parameter K 会不会也随着我持续减肥或者说减肥成功有一个变化呀？
对，
还是说它是
这个 K 是一定要变化的，就是 K 是随着我的减肥我会变化的，但是这个 preference 就是我们一般就是theory， 不是或者就
这个我理解，大家一般
stable 的这个 preference， 对吧？
对，要不然的话就是很多 econ theory 就是 you can explain everything 嘛，对吧？如果是 preference 可以变。
对，要不然就是所有的东西都可以被这个 preference， 就是我对不同的东西有不同的 preference， 这个就可以解释万物。但是我们这个 do yourself 里面，就是我们这个主要就是这个 K 是可以变化的，就是 K 并不是一个 stable 的东西。
对，那就是我就比较好奇了，为什么这个 K 不是一个 intrinsic 的东西呢？既然这个 do self 都是你个人的这个，就是你的这个决策系统里面的一部分嘛，对吧？那为什么这个 K 可以随时间变化，而不是一个 fundamental 的东西？
这是一个好问题，我也不知道该怎么解释的比较好。就是你知道，我们做 self control 的时候，
对对对，
大家一般会有这个 beta delta hyperbolic discount， 这个 beta 对吧？就是你可以把这个 k 简单理解成 beta， 这个 beta 是我们在这里面就相当于是
present bias 嘛，那种感觉，对吧？
对，就不同的人可能会有不同的 beta， 然后这个 beta 有可能也根据也会变，就是比如你减肥过程中你这个 beta 可能就会变什么之类的。但是我也不知道该怎么，你说的这个确实有道理，我应该想一个更加convincing的方法。
因为传统的模型里面那个 beta 是不变的嘛，就是 there's individual difference， 但是 beta 就是不会随着你个人的那个 dynamically 不会变的。对，因为如果那个 beta 变了，也相当于变了你的 preference， 对吧？
对对，我得想一下怎么用一个更好的解释来解释这个。你这么说确实有道理，
对，我就单纯比较好奇，因为我自己其实是很 buy 这个 dual self model 的，尤其涉及到这种 indulgence consumption 的时候，我还是觉得这个说服力是要比那种就一个 optimizer 的那种模型我觉得更有解释力的。
我自己也觉得这个比较 consistent， 但是我也确实没有一个更好的解释来回答你这个为什么 k 可以变。
因为我记得当时我们读博的时候选那个 behavioral economics 那课的时候，我就对dual self model 比较感兴趣，然后跟当时的那个授课的老师说他做 behavioral 的，然后他说这类的模型就太不成熟了，不建议你去搞。
这也可能是为什么我们 paper 被拒了的原因吧。
所以现在的状态是准备接着投吗？还是已经有？
对，我们可能12月份要投出去，打算投econ的journal。marketing 有点
更加 public policy relevant 嘛，
对对对，就是我们之前其实这版最之前的版本是投去了 QJE， 其实他们 comments 还挺好的，就是你提的很多问题 reviewer 都有提，但是还是把我们拒了。但被 QJE 拒，我觉得能拿到 referee report 就已经很开心了。后来我 co-author 他们说他们都太那种了，就只有我嘛，他们说就投一个 marketing journal 对我帮助比较大吧，然后也不是特别顺利，然后现在他们说算了吧，还是投回econ journal 吧。那不过确实econ相对来说就是更 reasonable 一点吧。
是的，这整个这个 flavor 感觉也更偏econ。
对，就是因为没有特别多这种 firm 或者是firm related 的这种或者 managerial implication， 更多的是更偏 public policy 一点。对，就因为我 co-author 他们都是 economist。
对，我看咱们会议室里面的其他的同学老师还有哪些想和鲍老师一起讨论的关于这篇文章，或者是关于鲍老师提到的其他的几个项目？
大家有什么问题可以随时就是会议过后给我发 email 也可以，然后有什么问题现在提也可以。
好的，如果没有那个新的同学老师要讨论的话，咱们今天时间已经12点了，尤其是开始的比较晚，我们也占用了鲍老师很多时间，我们就特别再次感谢鲍老师给我们精彩的分享，也感谢那个来参加的同学和老师们的这个积极参加，好吧，谢谢大家。
谢谢大家过来，然后也谢谢大家的问题，就是问题都特别好。
希望你这篇文章投稿顺利啊。
希望吧。
OK，
觉得 paper 还可以，就是比较不太顺利。好，如果大家有什么问题，可以发 email 给我，也可以的。那好，那大家中午。
你那边晚安，大家午安。
对，大家午安。对。
OK，
好，拜拜。怎么退出 ？OK，stop sharing。